A millionaire entered the pharmacy distracted, but time stopped when he saw her, his ex-wife, her belly already grown, counting coins to buy a single diaper. In that instant, he realized the true cost of the choices he had made. If you enjoy emotional dramas, subscribe to the channel and comment now where you're listening from. Continuing, the storm lashed Savannah with an intensity few had seen that year. Thunder echoed among the downtown buildings like ancestral drums, while rain streamed down the historic inclines and pooled in the cobblestone streets. Traffic was chaotic on Broughton Street, with cars moving slowly through puddles that reflected the neon lights of commercial establishments. Inside a black BMW X6 with tinted windows, Rafael Mendoza observed the urban chaos with a tense expression. At 42, he was one of Georgia's most influential businessmen, owner of a luxury hotel chain that spread throughout the southern coast. His fortune had been built with iron determination and a coldness in business that made him feared by competitors and respected by investors. On that Thursday night, however, the migraine that had plagued him for 3 days managed to shake even his usual concentration. Rafael loosened his Italian tie and massaged his temples. He had just left a tense meeting with Japanese investors and only wanted to get home, take a hot shower, and forget the numbers that wouldn't leave his head. But the throbbing pain behind his eyes forced him to look for a pharmacy. When he spotted the illuminated sign of St. Joseph Pharmacy, still lit amidst the storm, he quickly parked in front of the establishment. The contrast was stark. His Italian leather shoes stepped into puddles on the poorly maintained pharmacy floor, while his dark designer suit highlighted his presence in that simple, dimly lit environment. The cramped shelves displayed basic products, and the air smelled of dampness mixed with cheap disinfectant. Rafael walked with determined steps towards the counter, ignoring the curious glances of the attendant and an elderly lady choosing cough syrup. It was then that a metallic sound caught his attention, coins falling onto the wet floor, rolling in different directions. Rafael turned, irritated by the interruption, and saw a woman bent down, trying to collect the coins that slipped from her trembling hands. She was pregnant, her belly very evident under a simple, faded dress. Her brown hair was tied up haphazardly, wet from the rain, and she was breathing with difficulty from the effort of bending down. For a moment, Rafael considered offering to help, but something made him hesitate. There was something familiar about that woman, the delicate profile, the way she tied her hair. She slowly stood up, leaning on the counter, and handed the attendant a handful of small coins, counting each one carefully. "Please, just one diaper," she said, her voice soft but tired. "It's all I have." The attendant looked at the coins with an impatient expression. "It's not even enough for one diaper, ma'am. You need $2 more." Rafael felt something contract in his chest. There was a wounded dignity in that woman that deeply troubled him. He was about to intervene when she lifted her face to look directly at him. In that instant, the world stopped. It was Julia, his ex-wife. The same woman who, 5 years earlier, wore designer dresses and accompanied him to gala dinners with the most powerful businessmen of the South. The same one who slept in Egyptian silk sheets in his penthouse near Forsyth Park and traveled first class to Paris on weekends. Now there, counting coins to buy a diaper, with wet clothes and a look that mixed exhaustion and deep sadness. The recognition was mutual and instantaneous. Julia's brown eyes widened for a second, then hardened into an expression Rafael knew well. It was the same look she had given him during their last argument, before walking out the door with only a suitcase in her hands and a phrase that still echoed in his memory. "You never trusted me, Rafael. And without trust, we have nothing." The silence between them was broken only by the sound of rain against the pharmacy window. The attendant waited impatiently, oblivious to the drama unfolding before him. Rafael took a step towards Julia, but she raised her right hand, stopping him with a firm gesture. "I don't need your charity," she said, her voice controlled but laden with emotion. Rafael opened his mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come out. Julia took the diaper the attendant finally handed her, refused the change of a few cents, and walked towards the door. She paused for an instant, without turning, as if she were about to say something, but then shook her head and walked out into the rain. Rafael stood still in the middle of the pharmacy, feeling as if a hurricane had passed through. The attendant cleared his throat, expecting to be served, but he couldn't even move. Julia was pregnant, very pregnant. Whose? When? The questions bombarded his mind as he tried to process what had just happened. He bought the migraine medicine automatically, paid without checking the change, and rushed out to his car. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he tried to find some sign of her on the street, but Julia had disappeared into the darkness of the Savannah night. Inside the BMW, with the engine running but without the courage to leave the spot, Raphael leaned his head on the steering wheel. Memories returned like violent waves. Julia at 23, freshly graduated with a degree in administration, working as a manager in one of his smaller hotels. He had fallen in love first with her intelligence, then with her natural beauty, and finally with the way she challenged him in work meetings. Unintimidated by his position or fortune, their marriage had lasted 3 intense years. Julia had brought lightness to his methodical and ambitious life. She laughed loudly, danced barefoot on the penthouse balcony, cooked for him on Sundays, and convinced him to slow down his work pace. They had talked about children, about building a family, about growing old together, until everything fell apart. Raphael still remembered the exact day. He had arrived home early and found Julia exchanging messages on her phone, smiling in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. When he asked who it was, she replied it was Paul, a college friend. The messages continued in the following days, always when she thought he wasn't looking. Meetings arranged, whispered conversations on the phone, hidden smiles. Distrust grew like a cancer. Raphael began arriving home unannounced, checking her schedule, questioning every delay. Julia noticed the change and tried to talk, but he was already convinced that she was cheating on him. The last straw was when he found a message from Paul saying, "I can't wait to see the whole surprise ready. It's going to be unforgettable for him." The argument was brutal. Raphael accused, Julia denied, but he could no longer believe anything. Wounded pride and the feeling of betrayal completely blinded him. Julia tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. The next day, she had packed her bags and left his life forever. Now, 5 years later, the image of her counting coins to buy a diaper haunted him. What had happened? How had she ended up in that situation? And more importantly, whose baby was it? Raphael started the car and drove slowly through the rainy Savannah night, but he couldn't concentrate on the traffic. His mind was completely consumed by Julia. He arrived home, at his luxurious penthouse near Forsyth Park, but the immense, silent space had never seemed so empty. He spent the entire night awake, walking on the balcony, looking at the sea agitated by the storm. For the first time in years, Rafael Mendoza, the cold and calculating businessman, felt completely lost. The woman he had loved and lost was a few miles away, pregnant and in difficulty, and he didn't even know where to begin to understand what had happened. When the sun rose, his decision was made. He couldn't live with that image in his head. He needed to know the truth about Julia, about her life, about that pregnancy, even if it meant confronting ghosts from the past that he had tried to bury 5 years ago. The next morning, Raphael couldn't concentrate on any meeting. Financial reports seemed blurred, the words of advisors reached his ears muffled, and his mind was completely consumed by the image of Julia counting coins. Around noon, he made a decision he never imagined he would make. He hired a private investigator. Marcus Sterling was discreet and efficient, specializing in delicate cases involving the Georgian elite. Raphael had used him once to investigate a partner suspected of embezzlement, and knew he could trust his absolute discretion. In the office overlooking the Savannah River, Raphael explained the situation objectively, omitting only the most intimate details of his previous marriage. "I need to know how she's living, where she lives, what she works as, everything." "But with complete discretion," said Raphael, handing him an old photo of Julia. "And the pregnancy?" asked Marcus, taking notes in a small notebook. Raphael hesitated. "I also want to know about that. Who the father is, when it happened, everything." The report arrived 3 days later, and every line was like a punch to Raphael's gut. Julia lived in a small apartment in the Starland district with her 72-year-old aunt, Mrs. Eleanor, who was blind and depended on her for almost everything. She worked as a cleaning assistant on the night shift in 3 different places, including, ironically, the Mendoza Atlantic Hotel, one of Raphael's mid-sized establishments. But the information that most shook him was at the end of the report. Marcus had gained access to medical records, and the pregnancy dates matched exactly with a specific night, 8 months earlier, when Raphael and Julia met by chance in a bar near Forsyth Park. Raphael remembered that night with painful clarity. It had been one of those casual encounters that seem like fate's work. She was celebrating a friend's birthday. He was trying to forget a frustrating business deal that had fallen through. Both were alone at that moment. Both carried the weight of 5 years of silence. The physical attraction had never disappeared, and the longing, fueled by alcohol and nostalgia, led them to his apartment. They had spent only one night together, an intense night, full of unspoken words and desperate caresses, as if they were trying to recover 5 lost years in a few hours. In the morning, Julia had left without a note, and Raphael had decided it was just a mistake by both of them, a moment of weakness that wouldn't be repeated. Now, looking at the report, Raphael understood that that night had created much more than memories. It had created a life, his son. The baby Julia was carrying was his son. The revelation left him stunned for days. Why hadn't she reached out? Why hadn't she told him? But thinking it over, Raphael knew the answer. After the way their marriage had ended, after all the accusations and distrust, Julia would never seek his help. She would rather face the pregnancy alone than humble herself before the man who had expelled her from his life. Raphael decided to see her in person. Using the pretext of a surprise inspection, he went to the Mendoza Atlantic Hotel at 4 in the morning, when he knew she would be working. He found her in the lobby, in a blue uniform, cleaning the imported marble floor with slow and careful movements because of her belly. The impact of seeing her in that context was devastating. Julia, who had once been the elegant hostess of his business dinners, was now scrubbing the floor of one of his hotels to survive, and she was pregnant with his son. She looked up and saw him standing at the lobby entrance. For a moment, the mop was still in her hands. Then, Julia returned to work, as if he were just another early morning guest. "Can we talk?" asked Raphael, approaching slowly. "I'm working," she replied, without stopping her cleaning. "Julia, please." She sighed and leaned on the mop. "What do you want, Raphael?" "I want to know about the baby." The silence that followed was tense. Julia looked around, checking if any employees were nearby, then stared at him with a mixture of exhaustion and defiance. "Say what you want to know. Is it mine?" The question came out harsher than Raphael intended. Julia closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. "Yes," she said, simply. "Why didn't you tell me?" Julia laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "Tell you. So you could say I was lying. So you could demand a DNA test. So you could accuse me of trying to take advantage of your fortune." Every word was a blade. Raphael knew he deserved that distrust, but it still hurt to hear it. "That's not what I meant. I don't need anything from you, Raphael. Not your money, not your help, not your presence. I can take care of my son alone." "Our son," he corrected. "My son," she repeated firmly. "You lost the right to claim paternity when you accused me of betrayal and drove me out of your life." Raphael tried to argue, but Julia had already returned to work. She was too hurt, too guarded to give in on the first try. He knew he would need to prove his intentions with actions, not words. In the days that followed, Raphael began to act behind the scenes. He found out which hospital Julia was attending for prenatal care and, anonymously, covered all outstanding exams and appointments. He created a charitable foundation called Georgian Hope, with the official goal of helping pregnant women in vulnerable situations. Julia was one of the first beneficiaries. She received a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, financial assistance for Mrs. Eleanor, psychological and nutritional support, all seemingly randomly, as if she had won a lottery. Julia accepted the help out of necessity, but was suspicious of its origin. She was too intelligent to believe in such convenient coincidences. Gradually, Raphael began sending her messages. First, they were just questions about the baby's health, then about how she was feeling. Later, about general topics, shared memories, mutual regrets. Julia responded cautiously, but she responded. It was during one of these exchanges of messages that she mentioned having run into Paul on the street. The name hit Raphael like lightning. Paul, the supposed lover, the reason for the entire misunderstanding that had destroyed their marriage. "Tommy said he needs to talk to you," Julia wrote, "about what happened between us." Raphael hesitated for 2 days before agreeing to the meeting. When he finally found himself face-to-face with Paul in a discreet cafe in the historic district, the first thing he noticed was how nervous and emotional the man seemed. "Raphael, I need to tell you the truth about those messages," Paul said, without preamble. "I'm gay. I always have been. The messages I exchanged with Julia were about a surprise we were planning for you." Raphael felt the world spin. What surprise? She had found out that the band R.E.M. would be performing a private show for businessmen in Atlanta. "She knew they were your idols since adolescence. We were organizing everything for your 38th birthday. The messages were about the details, the invitations, the logistics." The silence that followed was deafening. Raphael remembered the message he had interpreted as evidence of betrayal. "I can't wait to see the whole surprise ready. It's going to be unforgettable for him." Paul continued, "Julia begged me to tell you the truth when you separated, but I was afraid to come out to you about my sexuality. My family didn't know yet, and I thought it would be better to keep quiet, but the regret has consumed me all these years." Raphael felt nauseous. 5 years lost, a destroyed marriage, a woman he loved relegated to poverty, a son who would almost grow up without a father, all because of a wrong interpretation, fueled by pride and insecurity. He rushed out of the cafe and drove directly to Julia's apartment. She was in her 8th month of pregnancy, her belly enormous, her movements slow. When she opened the door and saw the tears on his face, she knew immediately that something had changed. "Paul told me everything," said Raphael, his voice choked. "About the surprise and about the show, about him being gay. Julia, I destroyed our lives because of a lie I created in my own head." Julia leaned against the doorframe. For a long moment, she just watched him cry. "I tried to explain to you," she said finally, "so many times. I know, and I hate myself for it. I was an idiot, a coward, a small man who didn't deserve you. Raphael, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just want you to know that I recognize my mistakes, all of them." Julia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was a softness Raphael hadn't seen in years. "I always knew you were behind the foundation," she said with a half smile. "I chose not to confront you because I wanted to see how far you would go. I wanted to know if you were doing it just to clear your conscience or if you genuinely cared. And what was your conclusion? That the man I fell in love with still exists. He was just lost in pride and fear." That night, there were no grand promises or dramatic declarations. Just 2 people talking about the future, about possibilities, about how to rebuild trust brick by brick. When the baby was born, 3 weeks later, Raphael was in the delivery room holding Julia's hand. The boy's cry filled the room like a new beginning, and when Raphael held his son in his arms for the first time, he knew he had found not only a family, but a second chance to be the man he always should have been. The rebuilding was slow and careful. They didn't go back to what they were before, but became something better. A year later, they returned together to St. Joseph Pharmacy, which was now renovated and prosperous, thanks to an anonymous donation from the Georgian Hope Foundation. There, with their son in their arms, before the same shelves that had witnessed their painful reunion, they finally managed to smile. The past had not been forgotten, but it had been transformed into learning. The wounds still existed, but now they healed together. Love had been reborn, more mature and truer, proving that sometimes a storm, a pharmacy, and the courage to acknowledge one's own mistakes can completely rewrite the destiny of 2 people.